Welcome to the Wisdom of the East, your gateway to explore ancient traditions and teachings that emanate from the East. Get ready for an enlightening journey where we unravel age-old secrets and wisdom that have shaped cultures, philosophies, and martial arts. Today we will meet Tsuyoshi Chitose and the legacy of Chito-ryū. Chinen Tsuyoshi, later to be known by the name Chitose, among others as was custom to his culture, was born in an era where the Okinawan fighting arts were quietly taught to those who knew the right people. His lineage can be traced back to Chinen Yamaguchiku, aka Chinen Peichin, and Aburaya Yamaki, 1791-1881. He is a grandson of Matsumura Shotokan, well known into modern times as one of the most notable of his era. It seems with this family background, Chitose was destined to follow the path he spent a lifetime studying. As a boy, Chitose saw the entrance of karate into the school system in Okinawa by Itosu Anko, 1830-1915, in a regimented form for mass instruction, to Funakoshi Gichin, a school teacher he had in grade school, introducing this art to Japan as a middle-aged man to the Crown Prince Hirohito in 1922, at the first National Athletic Exhibition in Tokyo, to the opening of worldwide acceptance when U.S. servicemen began learning the art under different sensei and taking it home to open dojo in the USA. Chitose's birthday was October 18, 1898, in the Komochi area of Naha City. His father, Chinen Masuo Chliou, took on his wife's family name as was custom at the time, but never took up the study of the Okinawan martial arts. In his son, we would see a life dedicated to the study and research of the old ways, and his founding in later years. His method of karate we now understand as Chito-ryū. During his early years in Okinawa, he was known as Chinen-gua, and in later years, when living in Japan, he adopted the Chitose name for personal reasons, becoming Chitose Gochoku, among others that he used. Chitose, through family connections, had access to the finest teachers Okinawa had to offer. He began his study at the age of 7, 1905, under Aragaki Seisho, a teacher of Tode, and extremely skilled in the use of bow, staff, and kama, sickle. His grandfather, a senior official with the Naha government, had begun taking a very young Chitose with him when visiting Tode seniors, and eventually was the one to set up the Aragaki connection in 1905. Young Chitose spent over 7 years with Aragaki Sensei, teacher, until a disagreement had him leaving Aragaki for other instruction around 1913-1914. Chitose had spent most of his time on the kata seisan, though he also was taught sanchin and niseishi. Other noted seniors at this early stage of his training with Aragaki were Funakoshi Gichin and the teacher of Miyagi Chojun, Higashi Kanryo. Funakoshi Gichin was also Chitose's grade school teacher, and Funakoshi's eldest son, Gi, a fellow classmate. This early connection would last a lifetime until the elder Funakoshi passed away in 1957. His next teacher was Higashi Kanryo, though it would only be for a short period, as Higashi passed away in 1915. One fellow student would become the founder of modern Goju Ryu, Miyagi Chojun. Under Higashi, he learned the katas Saifa and Seipai. In Shuri, he studied under Motobu Chotoku, gaining knowledge in Unsu and Wansu. In Kadena, Nakigami district, he learned Shinto and Kusanku. And along with Aragaki Ankichi, the katas Basai, Potsai, and Ananko under Kian Chotoku. Aragaki Ankichi, not to be confused with Chitose's first teacher, was a close friend, and Chitose was deeply grieved when Aragaki passed at a young age in 1927. At the Sogenji, he learned the katas Jion, Jite, Shihohai, and Ryusan under Hanashiro Chomo. He also spent time studying the kobudo of Chinen Sanda and the old-style grappling and submission techniques from Kanagushiku Peichin, along with a future karate leader, Chibana Chosin. He furthered his kobudo under 2 noted experts, Kogushiku Ufuchiku and Maizato Shinken. As we can now see, Chitose was well grounded in the knowledge that was available during the early years that the public, in later years, would access as karate. The list of teachers and fellow students he was acquainted with reads as a who's who today, so many to become founders of their unique methods or leaders of a known system from that time. Chitose spent 2 years in Tokyo, enlisted as a member of the Imperial Guard Division, 1918-1920. But when he contracted typhoid fever, he had to return home to recover. In March of 1921, Crown Prince Hirohito made a stopover in Okinawa on his way to Europe. A karate demonstration was organized and held at Shuri Castle. Chitose's youngest son, Yasuhiro Chitose, mentioned his father talking about this visit so many years ago, and Chitose being introduced to the prince, but no mention of what Chitose's involvement was in the actual demonstration. Chitose took up teaching for a short while at the Okinawan Teachers College, and by 1922, he was ready to head back to Japan to study medicine. He was accepted as a student at the Tokyo University Medical Center and became a doctor in 1924, then spent 5 years working in a hospital after graduation from medical school before he was accepted as a full doctor by the Japanese Medical Association. His field of study was obstetrics, gynecology. On his return to Tokyo, he found Funakoshi Gichin had begun his teaching in Japan at the request of Judo's Kano Jigaro. Chitose would assist at times during these early days of karate as Funakoshi was getting established. Chitose taught at the Yotsuya Dojo and at various university clubs as they became established. Some of the future leaders he dealt with were Otsuka Hironori, who would develop Wado Ryu, and Konishi Yasuhiro, founder of Ryobukai. During this period, late 20s, he spent time studying weapons under Yabuki Moden. He was also making trips back to Okinawa to keep his connections with his teachers and peers. Into the 30s, Chitose was working at his practice and still assisting Funakoshi. He spent time teaching at Keio University at the time when Nakayama Masatoshi began his karate training. Nakayama would become the second head of the JKA on the passing of Funakoshi in 1957. Chitose talks about the outlook his fellow doctors had on karate in general. As it was at the time, karate was still considered a second-class budo, and Chitose would train in secrecy, keeping his martial skills silent to those he worked with. In 1933, he aligned himself with Toyama Kankan's Zen Nippon Karate Do Renmei, but lack of support at this time hindered any progress. In 1937, the Okinawan Prefectural Karate-do Promotional Society was formed with noted members such as Hanashiro Chomo, Chibana Chosin, Miyagi Chojun, Gusukuma Shimpan, Nakasone Genwa, and Chitose Tsuyoshi. By 1945, Chitose had lost all his teachers, either by losses in the war or natural causes. He was now living in Kumamoto, staying at the home of his future wife's parents. He had arrived in Kumamoto in 1944 and was stationed at the Kumamoto Military Preparatory School as an officer in training, and by 1945 would end the war as a major in the Japanese Medical Corps. He had 40 years of training and study and was now embarking on a new course in his karate. He opened his first dojo in 1946 and began teaching a new generation of students, which would culminate in his creating what was to be Chito-ryū from his many years in Budo. He also took a side venture in opening a department store, the Chito's Department Store, but it only lasted about 5 years, as the times wouldn't support an undertaking of this type in post-war Japan. With the immense destruction in Okinawa, he held a benefit exhibition at the Kabukiza in Kumamoto to raise funds for his home country. The All-Japan Karate-do Federation was resurrected with Toyama Kankan, and for a short time Funakoshi Gichin and Mabuni Kenwa held memberships. Chitose would hold several positions under this banner, serving terms as its president and vice president. When Chitose opened his dojo, he was at the point where two eras of karate were crossing, the old Te of Okinawa and the new systemized ways of post-war Japan that were reshaping what was to be modern karate. One of the first students from this group was Masami Tsuruoka, a Canadian who returned to Japan to live. He recalled some of his early years studying with Chitose, how the term Kempo was still used as a common reference to his art, and Chitose still hadn't given a term to his method of teaching, as was becoming common with other groups. Chitose would take the wording Chito-ryū by 1952, recalling a discussion with Aragaki Seisho in which Aragaki talked about the roots of his art in China around the 6th century. Thus, Chito-ryū, the method that goes back to the Tang era in China about 1,000 years ago. This was one way to keep the old teachings in mind in a modern society, by its name. By 1950, Chitose was ready to retire from his medical practice and devote all his energy to promoting his art in a new era. In the 1950s, U.S. military personnel began immersing themselves in the martial arts of Japan and Okinawa, with notable figures like Don Draeger, Dan Ivan, Walter Todd, and future Chitose student William J. Dometrich emerging. For Dometrich, what started in 1952 as a curiosity would evolve into a lifelong pursuit, initially training under Shirahama Ichiro, a Chito-ryū instructor in Beppu, before directly studying under the founder, Dr. Chitose Tsuyoshi. However, the journey began on a challenging note, as Chitose initially doubted whether foreign students could withstand the rigorous training regimen and initially rejected their applications. Despite facing setbacks, Dometrich persisted, making trips from Beppu to Chitose's dojo in Kumamoto during his leave, only to be turned away by a senior instructor at first. Eventually, his perseverance paid off, and he was granted entry to the Hombu dojo. The training proved grueling, with Dometrich initially interpreting the intensity as an attempt to deter him, but he soon realized it was the standard for all students. By the time Dometrich returned to the U.S., he had progressed from Shodan to Sandan, skipping Nidan along the way. A testament to his dedication, Dometrich received a certificate signed by renowned teachers of the time, Funakoshi Gichin, Toyama Kanken, Higa Seiko, and Chitose Tsuyoshi. Chitose's first trip outside of Japan was in the late fall of 1961, when a group on the Hawaiian Islands banded together to fund his traveling there. Tom Morita, James Miyagi, and Wilfred Ho were part of the sponsoring group for this 4-5-month visit. Disagreement among the sponsors cut short the visit, and by April of 1962, Chitose was heading back to Kumamoto. Later that year, he made a second trip to visit the Canadian Hombu in Toronto under Masami Tsuruoka. The visit brought the two North American leaders together for the first time, as William Dometrich traveled from Kentucky to see his teacher who he hadn't seen in 8 years, and to meet one he had heard so much about when in Japan, Tsuruoka Sensei. In 1967, during Canada's centennial celebrations, the Canadian Karate Championships were organized in Toronto, with sponsorship from the federal government. Notable guests included Dr. Tsuyoshi Chitose and his senior protege, Mamoru Yamamoto, along with William Dometrich and Michael Foster from the USA, who came to support their respective teachers and assist in running the tournament. This event marked the last significant gathering of Chitose's students in North America, featuring impressive demonstrations by Yamamoto and Foster, which were filmed and remain available in karate circles. Following the competition, Chitose and Yamamoto embarked on a tour across Canada and the United States, meeting with Chito-ryū students, conducting clinics, and designating Dometrich's dojo in Covington, Kentucky, as the Hombu for Chito-ryū in the United States, entrusting him with the task of building a robust organization. The birth of the United States Chito Ryu Karate Federation was in October 1967. To this day, it prospers under Dometrich Sensei's guidance. Through the 60s and 70s, Chito-ryū was growing in the United States, and in Canada it had become one of the driving forces of growth in that country, having some representation in each province and the territories to the north. The 70s would also bring rifts in the organization, with Mamoru Yamamoto being the first to leave the Chitose group. He had started his own dojo in Kitakyushu, Japan, in 1961 called the Yoshukan. This small beginning in the Fujitani Judo Club grew to a large number of dojo on Kyushu Island and the southern United States. With his departure, Michael Foster, his immediate student and North American representative, also left, thus creating the Yoshukai International Karate-do in 1971. Even in the 70s, Chitose was studying and researching the kata he used in his teachings, still undecided on exactly what he would end up with as a syllabus for his Chito-ryū. His insight to what he wished to pass on as a finished work was always a question in his mind. One of the Yudansha in Nova Scotia, Travis Cotreau, has compiled a list of the kata we use on his website, giving what historical information he could acquire, and bringing out new information for those interested in who taught Chitose in the early days in Okinawa. And as we come to know these teachers, we start to see their overall influence in this style today. In 1973 and 1982, Chitose would make 2 more trips to visit the North American dojo and view old and new students studying his art. The first trip, 1973, was with Kugazaki Hidemichi, a rokudan from the Kumamoto Hombu, and the last trip, 1982. Chitose was accompanied by his son, Chitose Yasuhiro. Both trips were well attended, with many gaining new insight to their studies by having the designer there to pass on his knowledge firsthand. During the 1982 trip, many had the chance to compete under Chitose's watchful eyes as an international competition was held in Chitose's honor. Students of all ranks from Canada and the United States met in Toronto to compete, and one stood out after all placings had been settled. Roland Figgs, a Yudansha under William Dometrich from Kentucky, was promoted on the spot. Batsugan, exceptional technical skill. This was the first time a Chito-ryū student was upgraded in this manner. As the 70s were coming to a close, 2 more splits were to take place. In Canada, Masami Tsuruoka would leave the Chito-kai and become an independent, running his own organization within Canada. In the United States, Michael Foster would split around 1980 from his teacher Yamamoto, thus creating a second Yoshukai group that was international in scope. With Tsuruoka now on his own, the Canadian organization took on new leadership, with Shane Higashi becoming counselor, and David Akutagawa taking the vice-counselor position. This new leadership also brought a drastic change in the techniques to be taught in Canada, as we now had to adjust to what was being taught in Japan. On June 6, 1984, Dr. Tsuyoshi Chitose passed away while in hospital. He had been ill for some time now. Students who were in Japan training at the time said Chitose still spent time teaching, as he was able to, under these conditions, until he was hospitalized. At his passing, we also lost another of the few remaining connections to the rich heritage of Okinawan Budo. Tsuyoshi Chitose, the founder of Chito-ryū, left behind a profound legacy that continues to shape the landscape of martial arts. Born in 1898 in Okinawa, Japan, Chitose dedicated his life to the study and practice of karate. His journey began with training under various masters, including Aragaki, Sisho, and Higashi Kanryo, where he honed his skills in kata, weaponry, and self-defense techniques. Chitose's innovative approach to karate instruction led to the development of Chito-ryū, a style characterized by its emphasis on practicality, efficiency, and traditional values. His integration of Okinawan dance as a covert training method during the Allied occupation of Japan showcased his adaptability and ingenuity in navigating challenging circumstances. This approach not only preserved the essence of karate, but also allowed for its continued practice and dissemination during a period of strict martial arts restrictions. Beyond technical prowess, Chitose's legacy lies in his commitment to sharing his knowledge and nurturing future generations of martial artists. Through his teachings and mentorship, he inspired a global community of practitioners who continue to uphold the principles and traditions of Chito-ryū. His impact extends far beyond the dojo, influencing not only the practice of karate, but also the values of discipline, respect, and perseverance that resonate with practitioners worldwide. If you liked it, take a look at these videos that are in the cards. At the end, like, comment, share, and see you in the next video.